Okay.
Try that again.
Okay. Good morning. Let's call the Committee of the Whole to order. First thing on the agenda is ordinance update with Chris Pence.
Good morning, Madam Chair and Commissioners. What you have before you today is a draft update of the land use ordinance. If you'll notice at your desks, I put a couple documents for you that we might find handy. One looks like this. It's got some, looks like Packer colors. Maybe I should think of a different color scheme, but it just occurred to me that maybe this looks like a Packer fan, which I am not. But this is a summary of the changes to the ordinance that we're working on right now. The ordinance changes that are in the yellow highlight are more of a policy change, and the ones that are in green are just more of a housekeeping change that aren't significant policy. So I just wanted to provide that. And then I also have a document here that will just kind of give a proposed timeline that we could potentially implement as we walk through this ordinance update. So just as a reminder, we did recently do an ordinance update that was approved here at the county board back in December of 2025. The big three changes that we made during that timeline, or during that approval, would have been deleting the shared capital resorts out of the ordinance. We had to make some significant updates to our septic system ordinance, Article 37, to be in compliance with Minnesota Pollution Control Agency standards. And then we also made some changes to some of our shoreline vegetation standards when folks would apply for a shoreline alteration permit. So those are kind of the three big buckets that we made some amendments to last year. And then what initiated this current ordinance update was a discussion that our office has had with a solar developer that looking to develop a larger solar opportunity in the county. And so as we looked at the ordinance, we realized that we didn't really have anything in the ordinance particularly related to renewable energy. We had a small area that talked a little bit about what could be done as far as a residential use at your home, but when we're talking more of these larger commercial opportunities, we didn't have an ordinance update for that. So that was really the key driver of what this ordinance update is about that's before you today. While we were at it, when Gary and I had some discussions, we always are trying to find ways that we think we can improve and make the ordinance better in addition to that renewable energy article. So we'll go into some details, but so there's really three keys that we're really focusing on with this update. One is renewable energy article, and then talking about our sensitive shoreline district and proposing to delete that as a zoning district, and then to update the vegetation standards that we have. We currently have a shoreline rapid assessment model that we use for vegetation standards, and we'll talk about a proposal that we think makes it more streamlined and simple for folks to use. So the first thing that I'm just going to hit on would be the sensitive shoreline district. So that is a zoning district that's our land use district that the county put in place back in 2010. What it is a district that will be designated by the county board in areas where the board deems the shoreline of a lake to be considered more sensitive than maybe a general lake classification, which we have our general development and our recreational development classifications. And what that sensitive shoreline did is that the DNR has done a study on large lakes in the state of Minnesota and been identified what they felt were areas that were sensitive shoreline that might not might be more sensitive than a lake classification such as general development or recreational development. So like say for example, on Whitefish Lake, it could be some smaller bays that might have more of a characteristics of a natural environment lake versus a general development or a recreational development lake. And so what would happen is that if the board felt that sensitive shoreline was significant and needed higher protections, would be that you could reclassify that to the sensitive shoreline, and that would mean any future development on those lots would have to meet natural environment standards. So right now on a general development lake, you'd be looking at a lot size requirements of 30,000 square feet, 3/4 of an acre, 100 feet wide with a 75-foot setback. If we are to change this to a sensitive shoreline district zoning on that parcel, it would have to meet natural environment standards for any future lot subdivisions, which would be closer to 2 acres and 150-foot setback. That has never been implemented in the county. We have never used sensitive shoreline. It's never been proposed. And so it's been going on, like I said, 2010, so it's been going on 16 years, hasn't been utilized. I did reach out to Cass County because they had that idea of sensitive shoreline came from Cass County back in 2010. And they repealed they called it resource protection up in Cass County, but they repealed that in 2020 or 2021. So Cass has also eliminated that section from their ordinance because they didn't find that it was something that really applied as much to what they thought when they first initially put it into place. And that was back when John Sumption was consulting with us on the ordinance. He had just retired from Cass County, and so that was kind of the how that came to be in our ordinance. So that's something that we're proposing to just eliminate that section and no longer have that sensitive shoreline district. The next one I want to talk real quick about vegetation standards. So the county regulates vegetation in 3 different ways. The first way we regulate vegetation is that for those lots that are undeveloped and haven't been modified as far as vegetation removal on the shoreline, we limit, we don't allow extensive vegetation clearing in shore impact zone 1. That's the first half of the setback from the lake. So say you're on like a Pelican Lake, that's going to be 37 feet away from the lake. You can't remove vegetation in that clear cutting except for your shoreline rec area, which is 30% of the shoreline that we had talked about when we had made that ordinance amendment back in December. And so that's one way that we regulate vegetation. The second way we regulate vegetation is by if you come in and get a shoreline alteration permit and you want to create that shoreline recreational use area. At the meeting in December, the board approved that there has to be a buffer of 10 feet on a general development lake and a recreational development lake, and then 25 feet on a natural environment lake. And so that's the second way that we regulate vegetation on our shorelines within Crow Wing. The third way is that if you're impervious surface, as a reminder that impervious surface is that parts of a piece of property that don't let the water soak in when it rains. So we're talking driveways, rooftops, sidewalks, anything that's a hard surface that doesn't allow it. Once you hit 20% or more, you have to do have a vegetative buffer on your property as well to get a permit. And what we do with that 20% is that we have in the ordinance called the rapid assessment model. It is something that we put together with the DNR back in 2010 to try to go out and assess what vegetation is existing on a piece of property, and then based on that assessment would determine the width of how much of a buffer that they would need to come back from the shoreline. That has we've had some issues with contractors and property owners who feel that there's some subjective aspects of that, and that it is not as objective as maybe we had hoped it would have been when it was initially developed. And so what we're proposing to do is when we look at the 10 feet for a GD lake, 10 feet for an RD lake, and 25 for a natural environment lake, just to have that same standard for those lots that are over 20% impervious. We're just trying to standardize that so that we're not having different standards for different ways that we decide to evaluate the amount of shoreline vegetation required on that. So this will make it, I think, much easier for staff to administer when working with our customers, and I think it'll be much easier for our customers to be able to understand the expectations of, I'm on a general development lake, I know if I want to get this permit, I'm going to have a 10-foot buffer down by the shoreline. So it's really just meant to try and make that a simpler way of making that determination versus having this model that we've been using that I think can be confusing and sometimes not always clear for the public to understand. So so that's the second part of the 3 that we're looking to make some updates to. And then the third would be just that renewable energy article.
Chris, so on that, back to this buffer thing, that buffer thing that we talked about last time, I didn't like it. What is this? How does this compare to that buffer thing that I was not in favor of last time? Is this if you build a house, now you are required, doesn't matter what lake you're on, to have a 10-foot buffer. I guess I'm not following.
Yep, sure, absolutely. Thanks for the question. So the ordinance when it was updated back in 2010 had provisions as far as what would need to happen on a property depending on their amount of impervious coverage. So if you have a lot that's 15%, if you have impervious coverage in a lot that exceeds 15%, you need to do a stormwater plan. You need to have a plan to manage the runoff on your property before it goes into the lake. If you hit 20% impervious on your lot, that's when it would kick in that shoreline buffer. And what the process that we have now to determine what amount of buffer you'd have to have if you have that high impervious on your lot was based on this rapid assessment model. What we're proposing is to do away with that rapid assessment model and go with what you approved back in December for that number. So it'll just simplify the numbers so that folks will know what buffer do I have to have. It'll just be dependent on your lake classification. It won't be dependent on having to have this rapid assessment filled out by staff and then have to have that, discussion about what percent of your property is covered with certain amount of vegetation. So it's just meant to simplify the process, and frankly, it's putting into practice what you approved back in December for all the vegetative buffer standards we have, so we don't have different standards for different types of permit requests.
Is there scientific evidence that proves that having a buffer or the water not running into lake or river more quickly? What's the scientific evidence that proves that that's a problem?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the first thing that a buffer does on a shoreline is native vegetation, when you have these buffers, has a really deep root base. And so it really holds the soil in place, and it really eliminates erosion. If you have just, say, a lawn to the lake, the average root depth on that might be a half an inch, where there might, you'll have the root depth of some of these native species that go well over a foot. So it really holds the soil in place on the shoreline, and that's good for two reasons. One is when the water comes off the property and is running down towards the lake, it stops erosion, but it also helps prevent ice dam from when you have wave action and ice dam in the spring and the summer from disrupting and having that shoreline go away. So we have a lot of people who will call and say, I've lost a lot of shoreline, I've lost 3 feet of shoreline. And you go look at what they've got basically mowed grass right down to the water's edge. And what that does is when you have that little bit of that minimal amount of vegetation, eventually erosion happens and you do lose that shoreline. There's also scientific studies out there that show that if you have these shoreline buffers, it does slow the water down when it runs off, and it gives the water a chance to soak into the ground before just running straight sheet into the water or into the lake, into that public water. So there's definitely the science out there that really supports the value of having that and the value to water quality. The problem I think that we run into is that some folks don't always see it as being attractive, and it looks nicer to have a mowed lawn down to the lake versus having some of that buffer along the shoreline. And if we go back to our comprehensive plan and we go back to our comprehensive watershed plans, every one of those watershed plans and that we adopted into our comprehensive plan does say that it's a priority for the county to get vegetation restored on shorelines and to protect shoreline vegetation that we currently have as far as that. So the state has been doing studies, and they're finding that we're losing these native shoreline across the state on a count of 1% to 2% every 10 years. And so there's a push at the state level now to try to figure out how to work with landowners on helping them to understand the value of what a native buffer can provide as far as water quality and the value that it would bring to property values, frankly, by keeping water. If you look at the studies that have been done between water quality and property values, they're very closely tied. The cleaner the water, the higher property values you have compared to the water that's not as clean. The property values aren't as high.
Okay.
So this is really just taking what you approved back in December and making it for all across the board. So just making it more consistent and easier for folks to take and to implement on their shorelines.
Okay. Thank you.
The last piece to talk about, which is probably the more significant piece, is just the renewable energy article. This is going to be in, if we look in the ordinance, I don't think we need to bring it up on the screen, but I'll just kind of walk through it. It's going to be in Article 42, and what this article does is it puts into place regulation for solar energy and for wind energy for both commercial and for residential uses. One of the things that's probably the most important for us to talk about is what is it that the county regulates and where does the state step in for regulation? So, for example, for solar, the ordinance that we're proposing today allows the county to regulate up to 50 megawatts. The state has permitting over the 50, the state has control over that. For a wind energy, the 5 megawatt is the amount that the county can regulate, then over 5 megawatt is when the state steps in, and you have to get your permit through the state to do that. So for example, like a solar, if you had, the research that I did showed that the average, for a solar project, 1 megawatt is about 6 acres. So, if you had somebody that would come in that wanted to do a 10 megawatt proposal, they'd be looking to cover approximately 60 acres with that. We have proposals if you look it's in the land use tables, and maybe you do want to pull that one up. I don't know, is that possible? It's on page, I think it's on page 50. Yep, and we'll just scroll down just a little bit. There we go, right there, perfect, thank you. And so you'll see, when you're looking up there, what we're proposing, that these generally would be an interim use permit, which is, if you remember, that is very similar to a conditional use permit. It just allows the county to put timing situations in. So maybe if you approve an interim use permit for a certain activity, it allows you to have a sunset date where this is good for a 5-year window, or it could be tied to ownership. So if the property sells, the next person coming in has to reapply to get that same permit, so it's tied to ownership. And you'll see on the left side there, we've got micro-X, which would be more small, micro and non-commercial. You're looking at those smaller ones that are going to be more residential use, and then you have your commercial WEX, which is going to be for somebody who want to come in and do more of a larger scale project. We have a meteorological towers, which would be basically, these are towers that get put up when people need to use that information for like being able to determine weather patterns and get that information. We would regulate large solar, small solar. And then there's a photovoltaic meter. That's something that is used when you're looking at doing the solar to determine the amount of the intensity of the sun. And then we also have then standards for, because when you collect the energy, it has to be stored into a battery system. So we have regulations for that as well. And you can kind of see what the proposal would be. That for the most part, we're not proposing any of the larger scale projects to be within the shoreline district, 1,000 feet to a lake, 300 feet to a river stream. It's going to be more in the ag and in that rural residential and commercial and the industrial areas is where we're proposing for these projects to be located.
Hey, Chris.
Yeah.
So this is maybe a question for Gary. It's a kind of a hypothetical that popped into my head. So let's say hypothetically we did have a 60-acre, solar. Gary, how would you handle that as far as taxing that or value, or even if somebody put up a windmill?
Sure.
How would, or wind generation, how would you go about putting a value on that? I think you have to, don't you?
Oh, yeah, it'll still be valued. We're going to value it like if that solar or wind wasn't there. And the rest of that is, they get a production tax from the state of Minnesota from the electricity that's generated, and then the guidance from the Department of Revenue is we will value it. So like if it's farmland, we'll still value it as farmland. And so the classification and the value typically wouldn't change on those types of properties.
Oh, okay.
Madam Chair, so Gary, the property owner would still pay the property taxes based on the property usage and.
Correct.
And value of that. The company who is generating the power, whether it be through the solar, wind, whatever it might be, pays the production tax, which the county gets to keep, I believe it's 60%,
I think so.
and the city or township gets 40% of what that production tax amount is. So when you have a property where it is generating commercial value for these types of energy systems, there are two different types of taxes that are being levied and collected for that type of system.
That was helpful. I appreciate that.
Gary, before you run off, Madam Chair, so if these are, would they be taxed commercially or would they be taxed ag if we're on a 60 acre?
Yep. They'd be taxed agricultural.
Okay.
Unless the property was commercial in nature already.
Oh,
So
yeah,
if the
unless it's
array
put
is
on a
on top of a
Yeah.
commercial building, it's still going to be charged as commercial. If
Okay.
the array is in the middle of a field that was previously classified agriculture and is still considered agriculture, it's going to be classified and taxed agriculture.
Okay. Thank you.
So unless there's any real questions, I don't think we need to maybe get into the weeds and on the actual, depth of the ordinance itself. There's some information there that, you can review where we've got setbacks and where those sort of performance standards would take into place. But what I'm proposing today, and if you look at this, we have a memo that I put together that kind of has a timeline. We would start that comment period that we have for all ordinances will be starting today through April 17th. The plan will be to go to the Planning Commission on April 16th with the work session, we'll work through the Planning Commission Board of Adjustment with the details of the ordinance update. We'd have a public hearing on the 21st of May for the Planning Commission Board of Adjustment, and then we would come back here on June 16th for Committee of the Whole and give you an update on kind of where we're at and what the recommendation was, with then coming to the board on June 23rd for a final decision. That's
So
kind of,
Chris, by statute, we're required to run this by the appointed Planning and Zoning Commission. Is that correct?
correct, yeah, it is, since it is a amendment to the land use ordinance, the Planning Commission reviews it and hold a public hearing and then makes a recommendation to the county board for final decision at that point to approve or deny or modify as the board sees fit.
Okay.
Chris, could you tell me a little bit about what's the difference between a large solar and a small solar?
Yep, exactly. So a large solar is like, if you look at a small solar, it's looking at, I had that flagged because I knew that was going to come up. All right, so a large solar is going to be something that's got 40 kilowatts or more. So basically, under 40 kilowatts is basically a residential type use. So what we're saying is that when you get into that large solar, it's going to be anything over that large scale or that small residential use. There are some counties that have more of like a grading scale that say they allow a certain, that they might allow 1 megawatt with a permit depending on its location. And at least for this time, at this point, I felt it was more, we'd want to have more. I just don't think, because as we mentioned, 1 megawatt would be 6 acres. And I'm not sure that it's a good idea that all of a sudden somebody wakes up tomorrow morning and next thing you know, they've got 6 acres of solar next to them and didn't have a chance to be made aware of or provide the input. So that's kind of why we went with that number to make sure that I think we're still making sure that we're notifying people and having the proper reviews of these things before they get approved.
Any other questions?
No other questions from me. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda is landfill fund balance update with Tom.
Good morning, Madam Chair and Commissioners. Here to talk about the landfill once again and some leachate and then get into fund balances and fee schedules. So just for those that may be unfamiliar, leachate is any water that we collect at the landfill that has come in contact with garbage. So whether that's rain, snow melt, or anything else, if somebody throws away some liquid, it ends up as leachate, and we collect that and store it in the leachate collection ponds. You can see them up there on the map. Those are the dark rectangles that you can see on the map. And then the spray field is just to the south. So I thought it'd be a good to give just a little bit of history on the landfill and how the landfill came about and how the leachate system works with the landfill and kind of how we get to where we're at today. So the Crow Wing County landfill first opened in 1974. This was an unlined facility, the first one was, and we accepted garbage in that facility up until 1991. In 91, we closed that facility and opened up a new set of cells. That first landfill is still on this site. We just moved to a little different area. So Minnesota Statute 115A.46 requires that all counties have a comprehensive solid waste management plan, which focuses on waste reduction, recycling, and ultimately disposal if needed. When the first landfill opened in 74, it was a way that the county could keep all of its environmental liability within Crow Wing County. Some of our neighboring counties opted to go a little different route than us, where they opened some transfer stations and then disposed of their waste outside of Crow Wing County. That was not our direction. We wanted to keep everything here in Crow Wing County. And as we fast forward to 2026 today, we see some lower rates because we have this infrastructure built in Crow Wing County. The environmental protection and landfill technology, really expanded, of course, from 74 to 91 and now into 2026. The current area where we dispose of garbage is a series of cells, and they are constructed with a base liner and collection pipes. So I mentioned that first cell was unlined. Now today we add a liner, we add collection pipes, we're collecting that leachate so we can process that efficiently. So like I mentioned, as rainwater and snowmelt comes in contact with the waste, leachate is generated. It picks up the contamination that is found within the garbage and prevents it from entering directly into the groundwater. Our landfill operator works hard to reduce the amount of leachate that we generate every year. Leachate is very expensive to manage and deal with and can be harmful to the environment if not treated and collected properly. And usually we generate anywhere from 3 to 10 million gallons of leachate, depending on how much open face we have, how big the cell is, and how much Mother Nature provides us in rainwater and snowmelt. As we construct new landfill cells and open larger areas, we try to close off those areas that are full. And so in 2026, you guys heard a little bit about this, but we're placing a raincoat over cells 3 and 4 and some final cover as well. What we're trying to do there is trying to prevent the amount of water that gets into the garbage and collects leachate. So all environmental protections for the landfill and waste collection are controlled under state rules and are detailed in a permit that we get issued by the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. The permit covers everything from how much waste we can store in a particular cell, the protection of groundwater from contamination, down to the hours of operations for a landfill. The county's landfill operator ensures that we follow all those policies and procedures that are in our permit. Our largest source of environmental liability at the landfill comes from that leachate. Currently, right now, we're using a chemical process where the landfill operator lowers and raises pH to remove some of the what they're called VOCs, and then they're also adding oxygen into the leachate through diffusers to volatilize some of those off into the atmosphere before they get into the groundwater. Once that process is finished, they take that treated leachate and they apply it onto the spray field that I mentioned through a series of irrigation, kind of like you'd see at a wastewater treatment plant. And then the plants that are out on that field do their processes, and then obviously the soil further filters that leachate before it actually gets into the groundwater and is cleaner. Fast forward to the fall of 2023 here, the county submitted its permit application to the MPCA. In 2024, the county received a letter from the MPCA indicating that we have to find a solution for PFAS. We've probably all heard of PFAS by now. That's that wonderful stuff that makes your food not stick to the pans and was in Scotch-Brite. And so that was 2024. That letter basically said that we had 5 years to figure out a solution to get rid of all PFAS in our water before we land apply. We're one of, I think, 5 counties that land applies leachate. The rest goes to wastewater treatment facilities. They've got their own regulations coming up about PFAS, and we're all kind of struggling to find or hurrying to find a solution so we can treat this. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we are passive receivers. We're not out there generating or making PFAS. It's coming in the garbage that we collect. So you've heard some things that we've done out at the landfill to try to, have pilot studies to figure out how to get rid of that. That PFAS, we're one of many that are trying to do that work. As of today, we still actually don't have a permit from MPCA. Like I said, we applied in 2023. In June of 2025, we did receive a response back from the PCA. It was 110 responses that the county needed to address, and we've been working ever since to try to address those concerns and comments that the PCA have. We met with them many times, and we were able to resolve almost all of them, except for one that significantly impacts how we handle leachate. So in our previous permit that we had with PCA, we were allowed to land apply up to 16 pounds per acre of boron. So after we do our treatment processes that our landfill operator does, we take a water sample and then we test how much of each different element, chemical, metal is in that water, and we can determine how many pounds or parts per million, parts per billion are in that. And so one of those was boron. We were allowed to apply 16 pounds per acre. Boron's a naturally occurring element. It's often applied by farmers to increase plant health and growth. In 2025, we land applied 6.9 pounds per acre. And you can find boron in things that we get like insulation, cleaning products, drywall, borax, for instance. So we use a system of monitoring wells at the county. They're scattered around the site, and we routinely test the water to see what is in the water, see if we have issues so we can respond. Because ultimately our goal is we don't want to pollute the water. We live here, we all drink the water. We want to make sure that we're being good stewards of the environment. We have been seeing some exceedance in the intervention limits for boron. And so because of that, in our new permit, the MPCA is going to require that we only land apply 4 pounds per acre per year. It's important to note that in Minnesota, the Minnesota Department of Health regulates what's called health risk limits, or HRLs, and risk assessment advice. Basically, a HRL is a known limit that starts to cause harm to humans. An RAA, or risk assessment advice, is something that they're uncertain of, but they think it might. And so boron actually doesn't have a HRL. Boron has a HRL, or an RAA. And so it's just a little interesting that we were given 5 years to try to figure out how to manage PFAS, but the MPCA is not willing to do that for us for boron. So we look forward, and they're going to limit this 4 pounds per acre boron for 2026. And like I mentioned, last year we were at 6.9. Basically, this means it's a reduction in the amount of leachate that we can apply to our land app field. And so as a result, we have to start hauling some leachate. This is definitely a change than our normal processes. We talked about a little bit about solid waste, but we currently have a vendor lined up, and we have a contract with the city of St. Cloud where they will accept our leachate. If we look at some of our 2025 numbers and compare them to this year, we're looking at approximately 4 million gallons that we're going to have to haul in 2026, and it's going to be right around $500,000. In the meantime, we are taking some additional steps to, reduce the amount of leachate we collect. We talked about the raincoat. We talked about the final cover. We're also going to try to start working on smaller working faces, so that way, the amount of water that hits that landfill, we want as much of it as possible to go off into stormwater, where that gets managed differently versus the leachate. So trying to do some things in our end that can help reduce leachate, but in turn, we are opening a new cell in 2027, cell 6. So that's kind of where we're at today. If you can go to the next slide, please, Amber. This is some of our, this is our fund balance. So the landfill has had a target of about no less than $2 million to account for stuff like this. So this is kind of where we're at today. You can see that that blue line, that cash end of year balance, it has some pretty crazy dips and waves to it. A lot of that is because constructing a cell is very expensive. So in 26 and 27, we have about a $5 million expenditure to redo some of the ponds and construct cell 6. And then in 2028, we also have some leachate stuff that we're planning for. And then as you look forward through 2033, 2038, you start to get new cells, and that's kind of why you see that ebb and flow. And so what we've tried to do is try to have our fund balance not go below 2 million, and that's just through slow and steady rate increases throughout the years. And so if we fast forward to the next slide, we see what happens if we have to add a half million dollar hit every year. We dip below that $2 million fund balance really quickly. You can see that blue line is almost getting into the red, as you call it, in 2023. So we're not proposing anything for 2026 at this point. If you can go one more slide, please, Amber. For 2027, we are looking at an additional increase of a quarter for a cubic yard of demo and 50 cents per ton for compacted MSW. And you can see that it looks better. It doesn't look great still. We hope that we can find a way to work with the PCA or try to find something where we maybe can pull more of the boron out of the leachate before we get to have to haul, and we can land apply more leachate. But this is kind of where we're at today. I think Gary's behind me. So
I just wanted to help clarify for the board. If we go back one slide, Amber, that green line, you can see we're proposing an increase every year pretty much. And we, instead of not having any increases for 5 or 6 years, the thought 4 or 5 years ago were to add smaller increases year after year. So folks, their garbage haulers don't have to, add double their, basically their bill. Just to reinforce or clarify, when you see all these dips and rises, how the landfill works is we open up a cell, we start collecting garbage, and we basically start saving money to get ready to build the next cell in 5 or 6 years. When that cell needs to be built, you will see our expenses go way up and our cash flow go way down because we need to expend a bunch of that money every 5, 6 years, depending on how much garbage. So that's why you see raises and dips. And we do try to keep a floor there of about 2 million. So if we just keep our current path on this slide, about 2033, we'll be in the red out at the landfill. So we have some time. We don't have to do anything if we don't want to. So while we propose these, if you go to then back to the next slide again, this is in addition to the proposals that we had talked about that we set for 26, and we've projected this out for 10 years. If the MPCA will not move off of this restriction about boron, and we have to haul, that much leachate, we need to add that additional 50 cents on the compacted and an additional 25 cents on the demo on the per yard. And you can see that green line actually increases a little bit. And then you can kind of see how the funds or cash flow basically is a lot healthier that way. So it's a little bit steeper increase that we're going to have to do in the future with this change, but it's happening fairly quick. We're going to have to actually do it. We're going to start this spring. They've basically told us, they as an MPCA, they've drawn a line in the sand and said no more than 4 pounds of boron. We've had numerous meetings with them trying to help us understand why that number. But that's where we're at. Just wanted to help with how that graph, there's a lot going on there.
So just a comment from me, Madam Chair. So to Gary, Tom, Deb, and the county board, I guess what I believe I had this discussion when we had solid waste committee, and actually we talked about this a little bit at personnel yesterday. If we're going to be consistently spending $500,000 to truck that leachate down to St. Cloud, I guess I would like to have us look at what would it cost for us to have the the equipment to do that, would it make sense for us to have another employee for that? Would a partnership work with the city of Brainerd? If people have ever noticed, I think in the spring and maybe in the fall, the city of Brainerd hauls their sludge out to the TC farm and other farms out there and spreads that out. They have that truck with a big tanker, and I don't know, I'm just brainstorming, would a partnership with them of using that to haul our leachate when they're not doing their sludge hauling, if that would work. I don't know. I guess I'd just like to look into it because trucking is expensive. Can we do it cheaper on our end? And I guess I'd like us to maybe look at that. Deb, you have any comment? Because I know we talked about this yesterday in personnel as far as the master electrician and Gary, we talked about the what we're doing with the surveyor. We're contracting that out. Is it a better bargain for the taxpayers?
So that was the discussion, Madam Chair, board members, that we had yesterday, if you recall, around the idea of evaluating when it makes sense for us to hire employees and buy equipment to do it ourselves versus to contract something out and have it done through a service agreement. Gary and I have had some conversations around that with this particular item as well. Do you want to speak a little bit to that, Gary?
Sure, absolutely. I will start with, we have reached out to Brainerd Public Utilities to have a further conversation on if they're able and, of course, willing to accept any of our leachate. We had taken biosolids from them in the past one time. Unfortunately, the stuff that's in that isn't very good for our leachate. So their biosolids also have the same stuff that we're fighting, the PFAS, borons, and so it's a challenge for us. Not to say maybe we can still, it would be great if we could use them, but if we can't, currently we do have St. Cloud. When it comes to a potential hire of an employee, I think it's a case by case. We had a county surveyor here for, a few decades. When we decided to do a contract with them, I'll just say, my opinion here, of course, is one of the best things we did in land services. Those kind of professional services, I'm not a surveyor. I have nobody on staff that could, other than that, you'd have to have all your trust like we've done for years in a county surveyor, but when it's just a trust. You have to basically take them at their word. I suppose you have to do the same thing like with county engineer and stuff like that, I suppose. But I will say that with this contract, we get, I almost want to say twice the amount of result for not half, but probably 3/4 of what we were paying a few years ago. So it's been a great bargain and investment for the taxpayers of this community in that one. When we start trucking, of course, we'll start with this contract. We'll look at, what a wage and benefit would be versus what a contract is. And if it made sense to hire somebody, because we're not going to be trucking leachate every day and there's other things that maybe we could have them do, it just would have to fit. But sometimes there just isn't a good fit, if that makes sense. But we'll definitely look into all of that as we go down this road.
Well, $500,000 is
a lot.
That's a lot of money every year. So, and then I don't know if that sounds like a harebrained or crazy idea. The city of Brainerd, they don't use that semi with the tanker on there. I don't know. Could that be some kind of a partnership with us where we can use that tanker when they're not using it to haul our leachate down to St. Cloud? I don't know. Just trying to brainstorm, trying to figure out ways to do it for less, to save the taxpayers the money.
I know we're not City of Brainerd, Commissioner. Can I just add, they have a big tanker. Why do they have it if they don't use it?
Yes, they use it, Gary, in the spring.
Oh,
And
they
I
do.
believe they use it in the fall to haul the sludge. They call it sludge.
Oh, that's what they're hauling their sludge in.
EPU stuff, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
they're hauling that out there, and then they've got, they used to call it a Terrigator, but I think they went to a tractor with it's really kind of a tanker that farmers use to spread liquid manure, and so they're really, in essence, got a tractor, and they haul it out there with this tanker truck, and then they pump it into that tractor and tank spreader, and then they spread that on the field. And then, of course, they're soil testing all the time. So they move to different fields all the time. They're not putting it in the same spot. So anyway, but they only use that. I think they're only using it like in the spring and in the fall. I don't know, but I guess it was just something an idea that popped into my head. If that thing is sitting there idle and somehow we could have a partnership with them. I know we do have a partnership with them on their snow plowing, on their HVAC, and so I think where we can work together with other government agencies, I think that's probably a good idea.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, the other thing to point out too is only about half of that $500,000 is actually for trucking. The other half is for fees we pay St. Cloud, and then our trucking contractor is looking at about 4 to 6 loads per day, starting here once things warm up. So it may be more than just one employee. They're going to bring some trucks in here and just we collect leachate all year round, and so we in the springtime we have a lot that we need to get rid of really quickly too.
Wow. Okay.
Madam Chair, there's a couple questions. Do you know what is St. Cloud doing with it once they get it?
It is my understanding that they mix it in with the wastewater they receive, and then they put it in the Mississippi.
So just, you and I have talked about this before. I just want to say it again because I want everybody to hear it. Our process that we use to not eliminate, but reduce our PFAS creates a natural chemical called boron that is good for our environment. And the state of Minnesota is not happy that we're creating more than the natural level of that. Is that correct?
So boron and PFAS are two different things. We've looked at some PFAS removal systems. The boron is just coming from the waste. They're two separate things. It's just the amount of boron that we're land applying. So they're two different.
Okay.
items.
It's not produced off of our treatment. It's all in there. We just have higher levels of boron than they want us to have when we apply it, even though, like this PFAS that they're giving us 5 years to figure out, they're giving us no years to figure out to try to get the boron under control. So we send the boron down to wastewater treatment with the PFAS. And my understanding, of course, the MPCA, we're under the landfill arm. Wastewater treatment's a different section of the MPCA, so they have different overseers, but it's the same department. So they have different regulations. And not a wastewater treatment plant guy, but what I understand is they have the same struggles we have with PFAS. So the thing is, if they get our PFAS, they treat it and can't get rid of it, it ends up in the Mississippi. But boron is naturally occurring.
That was my point, is I struggle with that because farmers are using it every day in their agriculture and borax and cleaning chemicals and so forth, and why this is suddenly a problem is irritating to me, I guess, but that's all I've got. Thank you.
And Madam Chair, Gary, how many times have we had conversations with the MPCA around this issue?
Oh, jeepers. You guys can help me out on that. It's been quite a few.
Including some formal appeals and
Yes.
the process to try to ask for an extension and all the things that go into play with this particular issue. So we didn't just accept them saying, oh, you got to start you can only do 4 pounds, you got to get rid of it. That didn't just happen overnight where that was the case. We've been having these ongoing conversations. These appeals have been made. We have exhausted every avenue that we have, essentially, to try to get, because you're exactly right, Commissioner Lee, the efforts that we're going through to clean the water, to clean the leachate before we apply it, all of those efforts have been identified and noted, and not good enough, apparently.
Yeah,
One thing, Gary, I'm glad you said that, because these are things that we've talked about many times before, and I bring it up because I want to make sure our community understands how far in front our staff is of the entire state, really, in things that we've done to help our environment and help our county, and it's costing our residents less than pretty much every other county in the state. And now to have something like this is it's ridiculous, so. Gary?
yeah, back to earlier what Tom was speaking, to reiterate this, to help folks understand, if PFAS is known as potentially harmful to our health, but boron isn't at that same level. They're giving us 5 years to figure out the worst thing, and they're not on the other. That's where we're just trying to put it out there so folks understand what we've been trying to work with the MPCA. So our last, you can say, appeal or response is, well, okay, we're not going to argue about the levels of the boron. Just give us the same amount of time, and we'll figure that out with the PFAS. Give us a little bit more time to figure it out. And the answer was no.
Any more questions?
No more questions here. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Okay, Camp Ripley.
Good morning, Madam Chair, Commissioners, and board members. Colonel Troy Fink, Garrison Commander of Camp Ripley. I'm going to leave the Minnesota National Guard annual report with the team for your review at your leisure. And then today is really just a quick update as it relates to things that are going on at Camp Ripley. So, going through some slides here. Our mission statement has not changed. Our focus remains to be on our community partners and neighbors that surround Camp Ripley. A few changes in some leadership. So Major General Sean Mankey remains the Adjutant General for the state of Minnesota. He is Governor Walz's right-hand man when it comes to military forces. Command Sergeant Major Jason Rost had just recently replaced Command Chief Master Sergeant Lisa Erickson, which was Air Force, and she retired. So now Jason is our Command Sergeant Major Enlisted Leader for Minnesota. Moving on to the division, both of these gentlemen have also swapped out. So Brigadier General Joe Sharkey has replaced Major General Charles Kemper, and he has gone on to other assignments within the states. And then Command Sergeant Major Mark Dempsey has replaced Command Sergeant Major Matthew Erickson, which also retired. And then Camp Ripley's leadership, right? So there's me as the garrison commander. I will be rotating out here this fall as well. So I will be heading into retirement. And then my Command Sergeant Major Ryan Hofstad just recently retired, and Command Sergeant Major Chad Turner has taken over for him. He was supposed to be with me today, but we had to kind of split duties here a little bit with some things going on at camp. Moving on, looking at some of the economic impact that Camp Ripley brings to the area, about $137 million, and it's kind of broken out in different categories there. There is a significant amount of things that we do in terms of, I think our biggest increase this year really falls into the construction aspect of what we're doing on Camp Ripley. So that's really been something that's kind of exploded for us in terms of building new buildings, new barracks for soldiers, different remodels across the installation to bring things up to a modern capacity. Our location hasn't changed. We're smack dab right in the middle of Minnesota. We don't plan on going anywhere, so we continue to be very proud of the 18 miles of the Mississippi River, the most undisturbed stretch of the Mississippi River on the Camp Ripley side, of course. So we're pretty proud of the fact there. And then obviously some of our weapons ranges and things, we're going to look at some of our modernization as it relates to that as well. Some of the training requirements are going to change, so we have to change some of the weapons ranges to accommodate the qualification standards. Some of our accomplishments, I'll just draw your attention to the second bullet on the slide. Camp Ripley in 2024 was the third busiest training center across the nation. In 2025, we were the second busiest training installation across the nation. We are now in 2026. I am very hopeful that we'll be able to reach number one, which would be a feather in our hat, of course, but nonetheless, we remain extremely busy throughout the year doing, whether it's military training, whether it's law enforcement training, or any kind of state agency kind of training, and we'll get into some of the partners here in a little bit. But as you can see, I did talk about some of the construction. All of these things are still in progress and ongoing. The big one is at the top, Area 5. That is a complex, basically a 2-battalion set complex that will house 2 battalions of soldiers throughout the year. So not just summertime, not just wintertime, year round. So we're pretty proud of that fact of being able to go year round. The museum update is also part of the construction plan. This is going really well for us, on schedule. Talking to the museum board members, they are planning to do kind of what is called a soft opening. Probably sometime in July. We won't be really ready by then, but it'll be by invite only. And then the grand opening is still scheduled for September of 2026. So looking forward to opening in those doors to the public. It is, I've gotten a few sneak peeks along the way. It is going to be quite amazing to walk through. Some of the scheduled training, this is really kind of the meat and potatoes of the briefing or the update. You'll see April, May, and June, we're gonna have probably a lot of booming and banging going on during those months with the artillery units coming through. That booming and banging will continue through July, August, and September, but just different weapon systems. Tanks and Bradleys and different things like that will be running through multiple tables and lanes to meet their qualifications to be ready. So that is currently kind of our schedule moving into 2026. Also, we do like to communicate when we do prescribed burns on Camp Ripley, which is really something that is takes care of our environment, takes care of a lot of different things as it relates to military training in terms of our fire breaks and all of these different things that we consider. But this will all come out on social media. We'll advertise it. We'll make sure, obviously, weather conditions make a big difference when we do this. So sometimes you might hear something on the radio. You might see something on the Camp Ripley Facebook page. But just be aware that we are planning to do these things. And then when you see the plumes of smoke and you're not calling the fire departments and scaring everybody. So it's just us. Some of the community outreach that we do on an annual basis, these are kind of reoccurring things that Camp Ripley employees participate in willfully. It's not mandatory by any means. This is just us being good neighbors, I think. So The environmental program, I touched on our environmental team. They are award-winning. Up on the left-hand side is a lot of their partnerships and relationships that they have in play. And then on the top right is really all of the awards this team has won over the last decade for the work that they're doing constantly on Camp Ripley and in the area. And then obviously some wildlife things, and then the Sentinel landscaping funding and our collaboration with soil and water with Morrison County primarily. This is our REPI program, or formerly known as the ACUB program, about a little over 40,000 acres enrolled by willful landowners around the area to really build that buffer zone around Camp Ripley, so we don't get as many noise complaints and things like that. But that's every installation across the nation tries to achieve these kinds of buffers, if you will, and we use the REPI program, or the formerly known as the ACUB program, to be able to do that. Here is our state partners that I talked about. Obviously, the Minnesota DNR, the Minnesota State Patrol have a permanent residence or showing on Camp Ripley. They actually have offices in the emergency management building that we have on Camp Ripley. We did recently had to say goodbye to Homeland Security. They did also have office space. For some reason, they moved back to Minneapolis and are focused on their operations in Minneapolis. So at the end of the day, they're always welcome back. But our partnership and our relationship with the state agencies is phenomenal. We do the State Patrol and the DNR academies. We do snowplow training for the state. We just really kind of, if we can support, we are trying to get to yes in terms of what we can provide for resources for our state partners. And then obviously, if anybody within Crow Wing County knows of any veterans or family members of veterans that are struggling, having issues, there are a number of resources available to those veterans and family members. These are some of the points of contact. I did not go to the right slide, or did I jump? I apologize. Okay, civil authorities, this process has not changed. So if the sheriff needed help within Crow Wing County, he would have to call HSEM. HSEM then gets in touch with the governor's office. The governor issues an executive order, which then allows the National Guard to help Crow Wing County Sheriff to do whatever that may be. So just some typical missions that we get assigned to. Recently, obviously, we have been in Minneapolis again this winter, supporting some of those activities as it related to some of the protesting. And then again, veterans, family members of veterans, these are some of the points of contact and the resources available on Camp Ripley to all of those folks. So again, if you know somebody, have them reach out to these folks, and they will be certainly to help. And then obviously the safety brief, or the final thing I show every year. This is something that is real. If you're on Camp Ripley, you come across something like that, we ask you to, obviously get a hold of our Director of Public Safety and our range control staff. If it's off of Camp Ripley, which recently we did have a call within Crow Wing County, where we deployed the 148th EOD team out of Duluth to a residence to basically recover what was considered an old Vietnam era hand grenade. So it does happen, it's out there, and our team is ready to support in whatever ways we can when it comes to unexploded ordnance. So that concludes my update. If there's questions, if there's dialogue, I'll certainly entertain.
Any questions?
No questions. I'll just say thank you for all you guys do for us. And we talked briefly before, but you guys are great neighbors, and appreciate having you there. So
Thank you, Commissioner.
Yes, and thank you for
Okay.
coming.
I'll have a great day.
You too. Thank you so much. Well,
Madam Chair, that's all we have for you today, although I do see that our new airport manager, Jennifer Roach, is in the audience. I don't know if Jennifer wants to say a couple words, or?
I can just say good morning. Sorry for my cough spell there, interrupting the meeting. Yes, so I started about 3 weeks ago at the airport, and very, very busy learning, watching, and observing what's going on. Really excited to be a part of the community in Crow Wing County and working with the city of Brainerd as well to keep the airport going in the direction it's going, which seems to be an upward trend. So looking forward to working closely with all of you, and I just wanted to come out and see what this meeting was about. I look forward to presenting, I think in June or so, where we're at with the airport, to give you an update, and I'll be back then for sure. Any questions for me?
no, thank you for coming.
Okay, thank you very much.
That's all we have, Madam Chair.
Meeting's adjourned.